Welcome into another round of the Props and Hops Super Bowl Shuffle interview series. I'm your host, Matt Landis, joined today by NFL handicapper ClevTA. You can find him on Twitter at ClevTA. That's CLEVTA. Also, check out his website, cleveanalytics.com. TA, it's been a minute. Welcome back to Props and Hops.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I can't believe we're approaching the final game of the season. It's been a long season, but it's been a fun one. And I'm glad. I think the last time we were together was over the summer doing a preview. So good to be back on the show.
Good to be taking it full circle here with you. And while we do have plenty to look forward to with the Super Bowl just days away, do want to keep that big picture in mind. And since we last connected to preview the season, what would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned this season from a betting perspective?
You know, the one area that I've essentially been able to embrace, not as much as I'd like, and I think I'm going to continue on next year, but really just embracing the kind of the wagers that are more long tail outcomes, especially on the upside. So, you know, obviously everyone just thinks that all these lines are so efficient and the numbers are, the final results are just right around the number and Vegas knows and all that stuff, but it's really not the case. And it goes all the way back to preseason win totals. I posted something on Twitter. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but essentially how, each and every year for the last decade, except for last year, the win totals have been just completely, standard deviation wise, well off of the norms. And it's, it doesn't make a lot of sense to just take over and unders. It's taken some of these alt overs and alt unders. So I started to do a little bit more of that. I had some Rams alt unders and some Seahawks alt overs, for example. I had Panthers alt overs. And so, mostly those did pretty well. And then I continued that on through the season, especially with player props. And a little bit with the side, with size, it's just if you have conviction on something, just take the alt lines. Because a lot of times the long tail outcomes are in your favor, and you can really hit some big numbers. So, like I said, did that with some money lines and then some alt spreads, but then also on the player props really were something that I started to embrace a lot more midway through the season and hit a handful of double digit outcomes. So really ended up being pretty good from that perspective. And I think going into next year and doing a lot more of that and maybe staking a lot more than I did this year. But that's definitely one thing that I learned is that just embrace the variance a lot more than I had in the past.
As you talk about that, embracing some of the alt lines, I think there's a good connection to a great conversation I had with Las Vegas Chris in this very same interview series to kick off the week on Monday. So glad to hear you expanding upon that topic. And it sounds like a lot of the variance you embraced over the course of this season paid off quite nicely when you talk about some of those alt season win totals you got down on. But I know it's not always roses here. So as a bettor this season, thinking back to, anything as far back as week one or perhaps even the preseason, what would you say has been your most tilting loss or perhaps your most tilting moment overall this season?
There's been a lot, and I don't, nobody likes to hear a bunch of bad beat stories, right? Like that's not what anybody wants to tune into. But I got to tell you, Matt, like it felt pretty jarring throughout the season, just not in the sense of, a backdoor cover here and there or losing. I'm talking like just extreme outcomes that are, less than, call it 5% probability. I was on the negative side of that way too often. And then, I know you had sent me some questions in advance, so I went and looked it up because I was curious. I've got, you could go on my website, by the way, and see my entire track record for the season. All the games are on there, so you can take a look yourself. So I went through and said, which ones do I recall being like the really, really gut punching losses, and which ones are, help me on the positive. And I counted 9 on the negative and then 5 on the positive. It actually felt worse because a lot of the negatives and bad beats were some of my higher conviction, higher unit plays. So actually on a kind of a unit perspective, I lost a lot more. I would say of all of them, I mean, there's been a handful. I can run through them real quick, but for example, week 2, I had Washington, Carolina in a teaser. I had Washington plus 8.5 in Detroit. And it's funny because
Mm.
they opened 2.5, got it down pretty quick to the through the 8, through the 3 and the 7. Nice Wong teaser. The line actually closed Washington as a favorite, if I recall. So I got really, really good line value. They were down big early, came back, scored a touchdown, cut it to 9. A couple minutes left, and they really should have gone for 2, but Ron Rivera is not the sharpest tool in the shed, and he ended up kicking the extra point, which at the time I was thrilled because that's all I needed to cover my teaser, and they missed the extra point. And I lose the teaser by a half. Just a completely brutal loss there. I had a couple of totals. I had Atlanta, San Francisco, week 6. I had it over 44. They hit 42 points with 8 minutes left in the third and do not score a single point combined the rest of the game. I had a couple of instances on totals like that where, they're within like a point or two midway through the third quarter and don't end up scoring the rest of the way. Like there's just, I had the Jets in week 18 plus 3.5 in Miami, just a horrible line. Skylar Thompson laying 3.5, covering or winning the entire game. Miami kicks a field goal to go up 3. They do the whole lateral bit at the end, and it goes into the end zone for a safety, and they lose by 5. Like just like I said, not bad beats, just like atrocious like gut punches. So there was a bunch of them there, and it was almost a 2-1 to the negative versus on the positive side. So again, I live with it. I ended up plus 8 units on the year, over 3% ROI. So just a decent season, but it could have been a lot better if the bad and the lucky ended up converging a little bit and it was more equal.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes more than anything else, betting is an exercise in mental fortitude, just overcoming those gut punches, as you put it. And it's good to hear that the season overall did treat you pretty well, despite things like that Washington teaser in week 2. I was with you there, also having plus 8.5 on a 6-point teaser where you've got the team that closes as the favorite. And when the missed extra point is the difference, that's a lot to bounce back from. But at the same time, this kind of stuff happens a lot more than the casual bettor might think. And things do tend to even out, at least in the long run. I know this season it sounds like variance skewed to the negative side for you, but overall, we do get some good breaks as well. And it's important to keep those in mind to just keep some mental stability over that long haul. And to that end, if we look at the other side of the spectrum, TA, how would you describe perhaps your most fortunate win of the season?
Yeah, well, real quick too, just another one I just thought of. It's just so tilting
Sure.
now that you bring
Yeah,
them up.
let it roll
Well,
on.
so I had over I think it was over 42 in the New England Cincinnati game, and I think it was 23-17, I believe was the final score, and that was the one with 4 missed extra points and Ramondre Stevenson fumbling at the 3-yard line at the end of the game. So like all of that to lose by 2 points on a total, that was just brutal. I
Yeah,
had to
I
bring
believe
that
that
one
was
up too.
Christmas Eve. So Merry Christmas there.
Oh my gosh! I'm just telling you, like those are brutal. Probably the best, I guess, the luckiest win, and it was probably the longest week of the season, and you'll know why when I talk about it. Was that Minnesota Buffalo game
Hmm.
with the lucky, the crazy Justin Jefferson catch, and then obviously, the safety, or what? Not wasn't even a safety; it was a fumble in the end zone. So that was lucky. I was on Minnesota, and that was rough because I had a little bit on the plus 7.5 early in that week with the Josh Allen kind of rumors. And then I got more down at 5.5 and at 4.5. I was heavily exposed to Minnesota from I heard from a lot of people that week that, Allen was most likely to be out, and then he ended up playing, and it was too late for me to do much in terms of covering some of my position. And I was just totally exposed. I thought for sure they were going to get blown out. And it was a blowout until that miracle comeback and the Justin Jefferson catch. And, I ended up winning everything at the end, which was just like, I guess I'd call that my luckiest win and just my most fortunate because I had so much exposed to it and ended up being on the wrong side of the closing line. And, just all of that was, I misread everything that week and ended up winning. So that was definitely my, I guess, the most memorable on the positive side.
Yeah, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And that brings to memory that was one of 2 marquee quarterback fakeouts that we got this season when I started this interview series with Drew Dinsick last Monday, he mentioned that one of his most tilting moments of the season was the Chargers Week 3 game against Jacksonville, because the Justin Herbert will he or won't he play after a brutal rib injury suffered in that primetime game at Kansas City. That led him to a pretty rough outcome, the way the Jags just took it to the Chargers in that one. And again, over the course of the week, he was maybe going to play, and then Friday of that game, it seems like there's no chance he plays. Then game day, he's active.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're just dealing with so many varying degrees of uncertainty. And I like the point of, I'm glad this worked out for you, but you also acknowledging that perhaps you were overexposed on Minnesota, because sometimes things can change on a dime. And if you don't have really rock solid information, it can also be, even when it works out, still perhaps a cautionary tale in something like bankroll management.
And I will say one other thing. I guess this kind of leads me to what else did I learn this year? I mean, injury news was the market is not efficient. Everyone who says that the market is perfectly efficient, those are two examples of it's not, because the news was wrong in both cases. And the market was way wrong in both cases. So not everything, the Vegas knows is not always true. And not everybody, especially when it comes to these injuries where players dictate at the end of the day what's going to happen. They control the outcome here, and both guys wanted to go, and both guys ended up playing, and the market was dead wrong. So, the market is efficient in general, but in very specific instances, it's not always correct and can be way wrong. So those are two that definitely stand out. There are others. There's some times where I actually heard early in the season a guy had COVID and was not going to play, and he ended up playing really well. So there's just the information was just you got to be careful. I guess understand who your sources are, and you just got to make sure it's rock solid, because people got screwed, I guess, from a closing line value perspective over and over. Although those are two examples of actually winning despite being wrong. But in general, it was an interesting year from that perspective.
When it comes to fine-tuning your filter and really putting your trust behind the right sources, I'd also like to touch on betting content with you. Beyond the bets that you make, you're also pretty active on Twitter, and definitely a follow that everybody should have in their arsenal. Again, at ClevTA, if you're not following him already. So with your knowledge of not just betting, but the betting content space, what would you say you've seen over the course of this season? A two-parter here. What would you like to see less of across gambling Twitter, and what would you like to see more of across gambling Twitter, or just the betting content space in general?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is it was such an influx of new content creators, and people on Twitter getting retweeted and just seeing different things. I don't know. I mean, I try to stay out of a lot of the Twitter fights when it comes to kind of all that's going on with the content space, and with people that are tweeting out like, oh, here's how you become a winning bettor, and here's my thread. That's what I want to see less of that. By the way, that's a lot of that self-serving. You're not actually trying to help people. You're trying to gain followers and try to essentially use your account to prove how smart you are, if you will. And I just kind of laugh. I don't need to see a 30 tweet thread about how you're going to be this great bettor and this great gambler. It's like, if you had all the answers, you wouldn't be just posting it on Twitter anyway. I understand helping people. I don't mind that, but just the long threads of here's how you make money and here's how you're a winning bettor. I just kind of laugh at that stuff. In general, I stay out of a lot of these Twitter fights. I've stated before, I'm not a pro bettor. I don't do this for a living. I mean, I treat the NFL like it's a job, but I have a finance job in real life, and I don't rely on betting for my income and to feed my family. So, who am I to step in and try to, argue with pro bettors, even guys who are, on Twitter and don't have, don't use their real names or anything. They're anonymous. It's fine. They're the ones who have to feed their families and rely on all of this to get income. So I could see them getting really upset and not being happy with a lot of stuff that's gone on, and some of the things that are affecting what's going on from a money perspective in the space. So I kind of stay out of it. I kind of sit and watch. So and if I get called out for something that I say that's wrong, that maybe a pro bettor really disputes, I'll step back and say you're right, and kind of delete it and kind of move on. So But in general, I want to see less kind of self-serving. Here's my ways to make you the best better in the world, and um, you know, I'll let others do that. I mean, I'll say one other thing, and this is self-serving. This is more personal because I'm kind of sick of it, and I rarely do I say things about this, but I'm kind of sick of people flat out just stealing my analysis and my information that I put out both. On my website, then also on Twitter. Like I see it way too often. I get at least one DM a week. I'm telling you, Matt, at least one DM a week from followers saying, "Hey, do you know this person on this so and so pod just flat out stole the information that you put out there and didn't give you any attribution?" And it happens all the time. And it's just like I don't mind people taking some of my ideas or some of my analysis or some of my stats that I put together, my research and talking about. Just give me a little attribution every once in a while. Just don't try to take do no work and just steal someone else's stuff and try to act smart with it. And that's what bothers me. So that's just a pet peeve of mine, personal thing. Happens a lot. Those who are doing it, they know they're doing it. So I don't have to call them out, but I just know that I know, and I get a lot of messages about it. So, and it's not just one person, it's not just two people, it's multiple podcasts. And I mean, I had a guy a couple of years ago who's flat out I was tweeting out pics and they're just flat out taking it and repackaging it and selling it without me knowing. And someone told me about it. And it's just like, what in the world's going on? So anyway, that's just a personal pet peeve of things that I'd like to see changed.
Yeah, flashback to our school days, I believe that would be categorized as plagiarism. So that really resonates with me as somebody who doesn't claim to be not let alone a pro better, but even much of an originator when it comes to all this. I think one of my better strengths is being able to identify the signal from the noise across the space and really curate the best of the best when it comes to the sharpest people sharing information publicly. And I try to be as sharp as I can when it comes to giving proper attribution and when sharing other people's ideas, not presenting it as my own. You or anybody else who's listening to this show, please take me to task if that ever is not the case. But yeah, unfortunately, it does happen a lot throughout the space. So that really does resonate with me. And TA, going back to your first part of your answer to that question, I think you mentioned one thing that sounded good, being open-minded to if there's a back and forth with a pro better or somebody who's really sharp and makes a good point, keeping an open mind and being willing to evolve and see things the way that they're presenting it. But I think I also heard you say, oh, if you change your mind, you might delete something. Did you mean that sometimes you'll actually delete tweets from a previous argument, or is that more just like the way that you mentally process information, getting rid of an old opinion to make room for a new one?
No, no. I mean, if I say something that is categorically wrong or incorrect, and I'm
Mhm.
corrected by somebody in gambling Twitter who does this for a living, I will delete it just because why would I put it up there when I've been corrected and I know that I'm wrong? And it's not opinion based; it's actually like fake, fact based or math based. That maybe I just didn't put
Got
enough
it.
thought into it, and it's just on a whim I just tweeted something. So like I said, that is just if I was just flat out wrong and I just delete it because why would I put it up there if it's not correct anymore? That's what I mean. Not an opinion. Anything that's opinion based, I'm fine with. But if I information is incorrect, there's no need to have it back up there. So that's all. My whole point is just I respect those who are doing this for a living and are breathing, eating, breathing every single day of their lives and putting food on the table because of this. And they obviously are in the trenches more than I am on a daily basis. So I'm not always right when I tweet something if I tweet something within the industry or within that is incorrect. That's all I meant by that.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you for the clarification there. And I only followed up because I know that some people deleting picks once they're incorrect, that can be a hot button
Oh
topic
no.
across gambling Twitter.
Oh, I
And
don't do
if
that.
you're
No,
trying to
no,
do
no,
it for
no.
the sake of accuracy or,
No.
steering people in the right direction, I totally hear you there. And yeah, I have never come across anything along those lines that you've done. But just thinking that if somebody hears deleting tweets, that could be triggering for a sports bettor who, consumes content across the space. So wanted to make sure we set the record straight on that before we moved any further. So yeah, TA, thank you for that. I want to be sure to also, while I have you, touch on a game coming up this Sunday, Super Bowl 57 between the Chiefs and the Eagles. If we look at things from a macro level perspective, I know full game side and total, this is, perhaps the most efficient game of the season if we consider how spot on the betting market is likely to be. But if you think about the side or total in this one, overall matchup, what are your thoughts on this Chiefs Eagles showdown?
I mean, it's a fascinating matchup. I think it really is going to be a good game. Not that I'm breaking any news. I mean, look, if you for someone who doesn't know kind of which side they want to be on, and they just want some action on the game, I get it. It's a Super Bowl. You just want to put a few bucks on it. I mean, honestly, like you can't go wrong. I know it sounds very elementary, but it's hard to not back Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs just from a kind of margin of safety. I mean, they have not lost by more than 4 points all season in any game. If you go back in Patrick Mahomes' career, like besides, the Super Bowl a few years ago when he didn't have an offensive line, how often has he lost by more than, one score? It's like it's like never happened. So just from hey, I know that at worst I'm going to be in this game if I'm a Kansas City backer. And obviously on the upside, they could easily blow out Philly. They've blown out many other teams. So if you have no other opinions, you just want a few bucks on the game, I could totally see just from a pure, like I said, margin of safety aspect. The Chiefs, are not the worst position to be in. I don't have a play on the side or total. I'll just be fully transparent. I got a bunch of props, but I think it's going to be a really interesting matchup. I mean, you got a lot of talk about the schedule, strength of schedules for both sides. You got the Eagles, who literally have had one of the easiest schedules we've ever seen in a Super Bowl. I think it's the easiest since the 06 Seahawks that lost 21-10 to the Steelers in the Super Bowl from a DVOA perspective. And I don't think DVOA even picks up stuff like, the Niners did not have a quarterback for 2 quarters. Cooper Rush versus Dak Prescott. Like, I don't think those metrics even pick that up. They just pick up the team, overall team metrics for the season. So it's probably even easier than what the numbers say. So I think there is actual validity to that. I mean, I compare it to kind of how I viewed the New England Patriots the last 2 years from a defensive perspective, especially. And it took me a little while. It took me into a couple of weeks into this season to really grasp it. But, the Patriots are last year, I think they were top 5 in EPA on defense. And then this year they were number 1 or number 2 for a while. And that really skewed how I think people modeled out and viewed some of the games against, competent quarterbacks, because what they do is they just suffocate the really bad offenses and the really bad quarterbacks to such a degree that it is a complete, it skews the overall numbers. And I mean, to the point where I think, like, I was looking at the EPA game logs of the entire season, and I think 2 or 3 of the 5 worst offensive performances all season by any team came against the Patriots defense. I think it was like a Sam Ellinger game and a Zach Wilson game. But against everybody else, against like legit quarterbacks, even just average, like Derek Carr level or above, it's a very mediocre defense. And so you've got to be careful as to you got to actually know how some of these advanced metrics, how these EPA numbers come about, right? Like a couple outlier performances against some really poor offenses can really skew, a defense like that. And I think you get a little bit of that with the Eagles. I mean, you can sit there and say, well, they played who's on their schedule, but like, what did they do against legitimate quarterbacks? The couple that they played, it's a very average to below average pass defense. And like, I have, people who follow me on Twitter know this or pick this up. I actually I know the defensive coordinator for the Eagles. I have a kind of a quasi relationship with him and people surrounding him. So I know his philosophy is to really prevent big plays. That's really the goal, because big plays, explosive plays are what wins and loses a lot of these games. It determines that. So they do play soft coverage on purpose over the middle of the field to prevent the big plays over the top, and they just rely on their front 4 to get pressure. If they can't get pressure on Patrick Mahomes, then they're just going to exploit the middle of the field with Kelsey and the running backs a ton. And so it's really going to come down to how the defense gets pressure for the Eagles, because otherwise, like, they can really get sliced and diced. I mean, to me, I compare this Broncos defense it's probably the closest comp, I think, to the Eagles. And, Patrick Mahomes threw for, over 320 yards in both games against Denver. He did throw 4 interceptions. So, you can get to him and cause some trouble. But in general, he's seen good defenses before. So I just think between that and, on the other side of the ball, the Eagles run offense, the Chiefs have not faced a single top 10 run offense from an EPA perspective all season. And we got the Eagles that are number 1 and have the best offensive line, best run blocking offensive line in football. So, that, from a strength of schedule perspective, that is a mismatch. It's essentially at league average to below league average run defense going up against, a very mediocre to bad, easy schedule. And now you get this behemoth in front of you in the Eagles run offense. So that you can see like I'm conflicted because there are, definitely ways to attack on both sides of the ball. And so, and I do think that the fact that the Eagles are a lot more aggressive on 4th downs is going to help Andy Reid, for as great as he is, very conservative when it comes to field goals and 4th downs. So, could that cost them late? That's possible. So I just don't have a feel for, which side I, prefer. I would love to tease the Chiefs if I could, because I'd feel very safe at 7.5, but I have nothing to tease it with. And so I'm, not going to tease it with the total or anything like that. So long story short, I think it's going to be a really good matchup. It's very fascinating. I think both offenses will have plenty of ways to exploit the other team's defense, which probably leads you to say, well, why don't you just take the over in that case? I just think that the way that Philly's going to try to exploit Kansas City is just through the ground, and they could be eating up a lot of clock. And, at that point, then that kind of all bets are off because, the pace of play slows down and, it really makes it tough to get over that number. So for whatever it's worth, my model, which I do not rely on, it's just a check, if you will. It has 28-26 Kansas City. So, I would lean slightly to Kansas City and slightly to the over, but not enough conviction for me to pull the trigger there.
I think I saw something about Pro Football Reference leaking the script for this game with a final score 37-34 Eagles. So, TA, it sounds like you might need to fine-tune that model a little bit.
Yeah, I'm way off. The script, I was not aware of the script, so I'm going to have to incorporate that next year.
Yeah, always improvements to be made. I wanted to follow up briefly on a couple of things about this game. Number one, I am wrestling with the fact that for pretty much the whole season, even though the Eagles have been dominant from the start, most people whose opinions I really respect have had the Chiefs power rated as the better team. And it hasn't been too terribly close. So I know the Chiefs have some injury concerns in their wide receiving core. But even though Philly has been so dominant in their 2 playoff wins, and Jalen Hurts has a really good record as a starter this season, I wonder how we get to the Eagles as a favorite. And at the same time, this is such an efficient betting market when we're talking Super Bowl point spreads. Have you also had Kansas City power rated the better team pretty much all season? And can you make sense of why they have held pretty firmly as the underdog in this matchup on a neutral site?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do. And I think it's, it's just the accumulation of the injuries to Kansas City. I mean, it has to be, multiple receivers, Mahomes on the ankle. We saw, look, Mahomes, the Chiefs would have closed 4.5 probably against Cincinnati if he was fully healthy. So, you could see the value of that ankle alone. Now, even if you discount that because he, kind of proved that he's still Mahomes to some degree, even with that bum ankle, he was a little bit, he did hobble a little bit. So you definitely do need to discount that. And then you add in the wide receivers and, who, even if Juju Smith-Schuster does play, even if Kadarius Toney do play, are they 100%? Or are they just going to be playing on kind of 80%? And will they leave early? And so I think all of that kind of, sprinkled in kind of gets you from maybe where the true line should be. If it was Kansas City -1, it gets you to, flip to 1.5 to the Eagles. That's probably what it is. But to be honest, and maybe I'll eat my words at the end of the day. I mean, the difference between a +1.5 to a -1.5 is not really severe, right? Cutting through the zero. So, this isn't Philly -3 here. So I don't know if it matters as much. Now, maybe it does because Philly could go for 2 at some point and really change the outcome here. And maybe 1 is a key number with them. But in general, plus 1.5, minus 1.5, it really is kind of negligible either way. So that's probably, the reasoning. I don't think that it's, worth enough to really decipher too much other than it's just the injury concerns, I guess, from the Chiefs perspective. And
Fair
I
enough.
will
And
too. I'm sorry. I will say real quick. I mean, the Jalen Hurts stuff has got to be. I'm not sure if he's physically still hurt. I actually, my theory is it's more mental, because when you look at some of his numbers since he's come back, I mean, he just watching the game, he's missed a lot of throws, especially deep. I mean, his completion percentage over expected is -3% since he's been back, um, compared to plus 3.3 in all the games prior to his injury. If you look at his yards per attempt, 6.5, 6.4, and 4.8 since he's come back, like really, really low stuff. And he's relied on a lot of chunk plays. So I don't think, I think he's healthy. I just think there's something mentally, especially when it's your shoulder and you're a quarterback, where maybe it changes your mechanics are just a bit off. And maybe that has affected his accuracy, but that's definitely something that needs to be considered here. So I just thought I'd throw that in there because I think that's obviously a big factor with this game.
I'm glad you did, because that tied into the follow-up question I was getting to, where you also mentioned while you see some reason for optimism around both offenses, seems like you're leaning toward more efficiency than explosiveness out of these offenses. And that could certainly hold true to an even greater extent if Hurts isn't at his best when it comes to the deep ball. So I know that for the Super Bowl, a lot of props we don't see for every game all regular season could be things like, will a team score in the first 6 minutes? Will a team score in the first 7 minutes? And those are usually a pretty pure derivative of the full game spread in total. So I'm wondering, in a case like this, if you think books are pricing it by the chart, and we've got a matchup where, yes, these are two good offenses, but even if they're efficient, they're not necessarily going to be explosive. Does that change how you might look at some props like, will a team score in the first 6 minutes? Will a team score in the first 7 minutes? If anything, maybe guiding you a little bit toward the no relative to what this full game spread in total are looking like.
Yeah, and I wish I had my numbers in front of me. I actually looked at that because, well, if you just look historically, now the problem is, I mean, the Eagles are the best in the NFL, essentially on scripted drives to start the game. So how much does that carry over to the Super Bowl, which is a completely different animal, is a big question. I mean, I looked historically, and if you look at quarterbacks making their first start in the Super Bowl in the last, 20 plus years, most of them, God, I wish I had the numbers in front of me. It's like 85% of them do not score in the first 6 minutes. Because that was a specific stat that I was looking for. But the problem is the Eagles are so efficient on early drives, and they go for it on fourth downs. They don't punt easily. So they're not ones that you would compare to a standard offense that we've seen in the Super Bowl. So it's just hard for me to, really base what I've seen historically and compare it to this Eagles team, just because of how efficient they are early in games. So, I mean, I think in general, first quarters are always lower scoring in the Super Bowl, and teams do have nerves, and, maybe they are a little more conservative, but this Eagles team is the complete opposite of that. So to me, it's kind of it's up in the air in terms of what happens in the first quarter. I'm still trying to wrap my brain around exactly how the early part of this game will go, because I think that's going to go a long way. And maybe just that leads into just waiting until see what happens in the first two drives, because that will dictate a lot of how this game will go. I mean, if the Eagles fall down early, I think they're in trouble. Whereas the vice versa, if the Chiefs fall down early, I feel a lot better about them coming back. I just don't think that Hurts is in position. He hasn't been doing it much all year in terms of coming back, and I wouldn't rely on his arm off script to come back. So, in that case, but if they do, get ahead, obviously you can rely on your run game, and you have a better shot there. So, long-winded answer. I'm not sure how the first 6 minutes would. I would lean no, just because in general, I just think in general the Super Bowl is a different animal, and we've always seen the first quarter be so low scoring. But the Eagles are a little bit different, so it makes it a question mark.
Understood. A bit of a push and pull effect there, and we don't have to force the hand. Our best edges betters is the ability to pick our spots. And to that end, you alluded earlier to having a lot of props in play. Given the current board, TA, is there one bet you care to share as available numbers at the moment of this recording on Wednesday afternoon, early evening Pacific time? Your favorite bet on the board for Super Bowl 57?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned, your very astute observation about how just the way I described it, that this should be more of a, a lack of big plays, more checking down, more kind of longer, more efficient drives, because I do see that's how the Super Bowl will play out. And so a lot of my props are based on that. So, for example, I'm under longest completion for Hurts, I think 37.5. That's one that I like. I think they faced the Chiefs are fourth best at preventing explosive plays. And between, I think there's 3 teams that Hurts has faced who is top 10 in lowest explosive play rate. And out of those 86 attempts in those games, he didn't complete a single pass over 37 yards. It was against Dallas, Arizona, and San Francisco. Those are the other 3 teams that are top 10 in terms of lowest explosive pass rate allowed. So, I do tend to like that under 37.5. But I'll say one that I'd like the most is the Patrick Mahomes over. I think you can get 38.5 pass attempts. I got it in my pocket at 37.5, but I like it up to 39. So I'm good with that. And again, it comes down to, I think that, I know this defense pretty well. I know the philosophy. It's force checkdowns, force things over the middle, make sure you can tackle, but do not let anything get over your head. And there's no quarterback in the NFL who is as patient with taking what the defense is giving them, just based on, he's had to, because so many defenses, run that cover 2 shell against Mahomes. So, I think he's gonna dump off a lot. I think he's gonna get a lot of kind of shorter, running back, tight end sort of completions. You look, his, in his 2 Super Bowls, he's attempted 49 and 42 passes in those games. I mean, one was a blowout loss to Tampa, so you would expect a lot of attempts. But the other game was a win over San Francisco. So game script wise, he went well over this number both times in 2 totally different game states, which I like. And then, you look historically, he has thrown, if you throw out the game against Jacksonville where he was hurt and the game against Cleveland a couple of years ago when he had that concussion, he's attempted at least 38 passes in 7 straight postseason games. He's averaged 42 in that stretch. You look this season, he's averaging 38.1. So it's right on his average is what this prop is listed. But, I went back to, I have a database. My analyst pulled this together. It's really good work. Every Super Bowl since 2000. And you look at all quarterbacks that have attempted at least 36 passes during the regular season. And I picked 36 is not something that came out of thin air. It's essentially the 70th percentile. I just picked the 70th percentile, and it came up 36 attempts. But 70th percentile amongst all the quarterbacks in those Super Bowls. There was 11 quarterbacks that had at least 36 attempts. 10 of them went over their season average. All of them went over 40 attempts. As a group, they averaged 45.7. Just in general, you get an environment in the Super Bowl where it's just more of an aggressive environment, more passing. So if you are a quarterback who's been aggressive all year, a lot of throwing, the Super Bowl is the last place that's going to slow that down. It's actually going to increase it and accelerate it. And we just continue to see it. In fact, I looked at I did a deep dive, all the major stat categories from players in the Super Bowl since 2000, from position players, and the single highest rate of occurrence for any of these stats to go over in the Super Bowl versus their prop and their regular season average, which are typically pretty close, was pass attempts. 75% of all quarterbacks who started a Super Bowl in the last 22 years saw their Super Bowl pass attempts exceed their season average. And again, that just plays into how it's a more aggressive environment. We get it. It's the last game of the year. There's nothing to leave on the table. There's no next week. So, these games are more higher scoring. The offenses, are let loose. So, from that perspective, history says there's going to be a lot of throws from Mahomes. I like the strategy factor. Like I said, a lot more dump offs, more things underneath. Mahomes is not going to take a lot of sacks. He just does it. What he does, he throws the ball away. So you can get those kind of cheaper attempts there instead of him running the ball, which could be 2 or 3 times, 4 times. Those turn into attempts instead, right? So he's not scrambling with that ankle. So that helps. And then the final thing is this Eagles defense. They've seen the second lowest neutral game pass rate in the NFL from any other defense. And the Chiefs, second lowest neutral game pass rate in the NFL. So you would think that the Chiefs are going to run more than normal. but they faced the lowest aggregate opponent neutral game pass rate in the NFL. Okay, so they've allowed a lot of running, but the teams that they face typically run, so that's not a surprise. The Chiefs are number one in neutral game pass rate, and so the Eagles, when they've only faced two other top 10 pass rate teams, and that's Arizona and Minnesota. And Kyler Murray attempted 42 passes in a close game against the Eagles. It was a 3-point game, and Kirk Cousins attempted 46 against Philly. So both times when they faced pass heavy teams, those quarterbacks went well over 38 and a half. And like I said, both were pretty close games, especially the Arizona one. So game state shouldn't matter. Long-winded, I know, but just gets me a lot of factors kind of tossed into the bowl. And I think that Mahomes over 38 and a half is still a good number.
I appreciate all the thorough research there. You've clearly done your homework. And I think that prop specifically is a great case study in the value of line shopping, because as you were breaking it down, I took a look, and not even talking about a bunch of obscure sports books or offshores, but in the regulated US market, we can see, let's start with BetMGM, 38.5 at a flat -115. So there you go. That's playable just the way you broke it down. DraftKings, 38.5, but it's juiced heavily to the over, -145. And then we've got FanDuel and PointsBet hanging 39.5, but those are priced between a reduced VIG -105 or even money. So even with a player as popular as Patrick Mahomes, some of these props are widely disparate lines from book to book. So 38.5 for a flat -115 is available out there, but as always, can't recommend highly enough that people shop around as they're exploring their Super Bowl props.
And that's another thing I haven't looked, but back to the first question of the interview was for me, embracing the variance. I want to find an alt line on the over if I can find one. If you, in terms of pass attempts, if I can get something over 45, I'll take a shot at that too. It's some pretty good plus money because if my theory is correct, if my strategy of how they're going to be defended is correct, if some of the numbers I laid out, the historical numbers about how kind of the median number of these quarterbacks similar to Mahomes historically have kind of hit that mid 40s mark. Let's embrace that and sprinkle a little bit more on some of these alts. So that's how I'm going to attack it if I find some of those.
Well said. Well, TA, you've been so generous with your time. I want to wrap this up with two rapid fire questions here. One, gotta weave in the hops. And as I recall, you're more of a Blanton's man, so perhaps some good whiskey or bourbon on tap for you this weekend. Anything aside from the betting portfolio from a lifestyle standpoint, a go-to food or drink, anything you've got on tap to help maximize your viewing experience on Super Sunday?
Nothing for the food perspective, especially for the Super Bowl. I'm kind of a basic guy when it comes to typical wings and pizza, like nothing out of the ordinary from that regard. But from the drink perspective, I think I did talk about it last time. I do like, there's a local brewery called Fatheads, and they do have a really good beer called Bumbleberry beer, which if I said that to my fraternity brothers back in the day at Ohio State, they would really rip on me, and I wouldn't be drinking that. I'd be drinking probably Natural Light. But these days, I'm a good for like a two beers during the Super Bowl. So that would be my go-to. I've got a 6-pack in the fridge as we speak. So I'll be ready to probably drink one per half there. I've got a pregnant wife and a 2.5-year-old. So, I can't go too crazy here. But that's going to be my drink of choice. I'm not drinking any Blantons or any, no sort of mixed drinks during the Super Bowl. I don't think that's not the environment that I want to do a mixed drink. That's more of a beer night for me personally. So that's probably what I'm going to go for is that Bumbleberry Fatheads beer.
All right, that's our second. If I'm guessing by the name Bumbleberry, probably on the tart or sour side. If it's fruited, is that correct?
It's mild. It's a mild,
okay.
It's a mild fruit. I don't want it to sound like it's, you're drinking like fruit punch here, but it's just a very, very mild, like blueberry honey type of a taste to it. So it's very refreshing.
Yeah, I like that. And I mention it because that is now twice in less than a week where we've had the guest in the Super Bowl Shuffle interview series single out a particular sour beer. So, as much as I bring the hoppy side to the table here, can also appreciate a good sour. So, it's good to hear that you're enjoying that in your neck of the woods as well. And TA, as part of your answer to that question, pregnant wife, another young child already on board. You might have alluded to how you might answer my final question for you. What would you say is one thing you are most anticipating this offseason?
Yeah, well, that's it. It's I've got our second daughter coming in early May, so that's a big one. But I will say, separate from that, last summer was the first time I had put out a kind of a elongated NFL preview, which hopefully you were able to take a look at. I got a lot of really good feedback, which I was very proud of. It was sent it out for free. Everybody was able to download it on my website. I went through every single team. It was a bunch of great graphics that my analysts put together for me, and then I did a lot of the content side. It was just packed with a lot of good information that even I referred to during the year. And I feel good because I had the Giants as my sleeper team this year, so I actually ended up looking pretty good, at least from that perspective. So that helps. But I'm looking forward to expanding that a little bit more. I'm perfectly open to taking any sort of follower, or if you have any sort of advice, things that you'd like to see from a NFL preview perspective, let me know. I'm more than willing to break that down if I can and include that. So I'm going to try to expand it a little bit more, but I'm really looking forward to putting that together. It was very helpful from a futures perspective for me. It really helped refine my, I had to go through every single team and kind of do a deep dive. So that definitely help sharpen my analysis and my, doing my homework for all those teams. So I'll be looking forward to doing that after I get at least probably a good month of dealing with a newborn, and then hopefully my wife gives me a little bit of time to put some of this together outside of my day job. So I am looking forward to that, and it's going to be a very busy spring and summer for me. That's for sure.
It sounds like a busy but great one. Congratulations on the second daughter on the way. And I'm so glad to hear that you're planning to do that preview series again, because the level of detail yet the simplicity of pretty much having just one cheaters, everything was so clean. It was such a streamlined experience on the consumer's end. So can't wait to see that again. I do have to say one complaint and push back if I'm wrong here. I think I recall you predicting the Chargers to make the Super Bowl, so I guess I can blame you for me getting
Yeah.
my hopes up once again on my Chargers falling flat on their face when it counted most.
I was hoping you wouldn't notice that I had the Chargers. I think I had the Chargers and the Bucks. I hate picking Super Bowl. Like, I'm much better at like who's going to be the surprise team or who's going to fall off the map. I'm horrible at picking the Super Bowl, but I had to do it because it's one of those things you kind of have to do if you do an NFL preview. And by default, I picked the Chargers. I fell into the trap of J.C. Jackson and Khalil Mack, and the star-studded off season. It's just unfortunate. And look, to make you feel better, I had the Chargers. I didn't even mention the Chargers as one of my worst beats this year in that wild card game against the Jags. That was another one that is just kind of like rolled off my shoulder, like par for the course. So I felt the pain with you. But yes, the Super Bowl outcome was not one that I predicted correctly. That's for sure. I definitely got that one wrong. At least they made the playoffs, right? I got partial credit.
Yeah, 2 for 2, at least getting them to the playoffs. And misery loves company, so at least we were in the same boat after that wild card weekend. But TA, we'll probably have to see if we can get you back on once you have something to share with your 2023 season prep. I feel like that'll be here before we know it. But in the meantime, again, thank you so much for the time. Want to let you get back to your evening. To the audience, gotta remind you, give him a follow on Twitter if you're not doing so already, at ClevTA. That's CLEVTA. And also check out that website, cleveanalytics.com. TA, thanks again. Anything I'm missing or anything else you'd like to add before we get out of here?
No, I really appreciate it. You've done a great job, and I'm glad for all your success. This is a really great podcast, a good group of guests, and so I'm humbled to be part of the star-studded cast. I'm not sure I belong, but I do appreciate it. So thanks.
All right. Well, thank you once again for coming back on board, and we'll look to do it again sooner rather than later as we get into the off season, ready to prep for 2023. And to the audience, want to thank you for tuning in as well. The daily shows will continue tomorrow and Friday. Back at it tomorrow evening with Hitman for our final deep dive on props as we approach Super Bowl 57.